Hi, everybody. It's David Wildstein at the New Jersey Globe. Welcome to our post-election live stream. I'm going to be joined with Joey Fox, the Washington reporter of the New Jersey Globe. He is as tired and sleep deprived, not just as me, but all of you too. I mean, the whole world. I can't complain about not getting any sleep because nobody else I talk to has slept. And by the way, if you slept and you're well rested and you're watching this, don't watch it. Turn it off. Just go somewhere else. This is stuff for political junkies, and we always enjoy this. We're going to be joined by Michah Rasmussen. He is the director of the Rebovich Institute of New Jersey Politics, and he should be here fairly soon. So, Joey, I mean, this was, I should start off by saying if you watched us a week ago tonight, listening to some of our prognostications, we apologize. We got a lot wrong, and I think we want to address a little bit today of what we got wrong. Joey, what happened? What happened? New Jersey suddenly more Republican looking. What happened there?
I mean, yeah, this was clearly, Donald Trump did well around the country, but he did especially well in solid blue states with blue state governments and blue members of Congress. And there's Mayor of Jersey City, Steve Fulop.
Mayor, how are you? This is
good.
I should explain to everybody what's happening. Michah is late because he had been hosting Mayor Fulop at a forum at Rider University. And I said to Michah just sort of jokingly, well, bring Fulop along. If he's going to be in Lawrence, bring him there. And I guess you decided to show up. So that's fun, and thank you. And Michah said that he was going to hurry over as soon as it was over. I guess you moved more quickly than him and grabbed his desk with all the cool buttons. And Mayor, I know you're a button collector, so we know what's there. I apologize for a Hudson County reference, but we know what's there. So I don't want to see this in City Hall next week. We were just talking about this. Joey and I had just started. So, Mayor, let me start with you. What happened? What happened in New Jersey? Why is New Jersey more Republican than I thought it was?
I don't think so. Let me start by saying that if you look at 2021, which was the Phil Murphy election, some people would say it's very poor mind. I would look at it differently. I would say that. Yeah, that's probably better. Yeah. Look, I would say, historically speaking, New Jersey.
Micah, keep yourself muted. It doesn't work when both
of you. Right, Joey, what happened? Are we good?
If I can turn it up over here. I don't know why we're.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Okay, now I think I think you're good again, Mayor.
All right, you go ahead. I don't know why we said such feedback. They can hear you.
All right, so let me just say that in 2021, when you had Virginia and New Jersey as the only elections in the country, and historically they go adverse to the president, Phil Murphy should have lost that election. He had a lot of legislative headwinds, if you think about it pragmatically, what was happening at the time. And there was some unpopularity at the time. And you have a million more Democrats than Republicans. It was a huge, huge, huge advantage. In Virginia, when you had Terry McAuliffe running, he started 30 points up and Youngkin closed on him. Same thing should have happened here. I would just tell you that there is just a structural advantage based on numbers here in New Jersey. So I think it was more individual to Donald Trump and Kamala and issue-oriented on Tuesday. I think that if you looked at it objectively in the weeks prior, you would have seen this was coming, and for a lot of reasons we could talk about. And I think when you go back to the election conversation of next year, I still think that Democrats have a big advantage going into 2025.
So what about the Hudson numbers? You've seen the town by town numbers. You've seen, Trump won Kearney, but he did really well in North Bergen, in Bayonne, in Secaucus. What happened?
Yeah, look.
And by the way, I might as well ask you if you're here. Go ahead.
And people that legally immigrated to this country, and Democrats are viewed, whether rightfully or wrongly, often wrongly, as being weaker on immigration. People that have immigrated here legally find that offensive, and a lot of the Latino community that resonated with. I think that the talking points around the Trump rally and the comedian didn't resonate with Middle America, or the Latino community in particular. Ultimately saw it for what it was, that there was a comedian that was saying things that was off color. And I think that we drove a lot of things that ultimately didn't resonate with that community, and that translated out on election day. But I think that's an anomaly towards Donald Trump more than anything else.
Micah, you wanted to jump in, I think, but
No. I'm just trying to man the sound here. There's something wrong. So you guys ask your questions, and
Yeah.
then we're gonna let them get home.
I go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say,
and then we'll get our act together.
The large Latino communities in New Jersey aren't organized from a political Democratic establishment standpoint. I mean, we've talked about this for the last year and a half in our gubernatorial campaign, that I think a lot of the political infrastructure in New Jersey is a mirage, because the party line and establishment has allowed them not to work and organize. And you see that in a lot of different demographics and areas where they should be more organized, and it just isn't. You see time and time again. And in this election on Tuesday, there was no mechanism to communicate with the Latino community, broadly speaking. And I think absent that, you saw these huge pluralities shift. And I think that's really the bigger story here, as opposed to talking about this being a purple state. It just really isn't a purple state. If anything, it's moved more and more in the direction of being blue. One thing I would just say, when you think about kind of the trend, the last Republican to win statewide was Chris Christie. And Chris Christie, he's a gifted communicator. I don't agree with a lot of his policies, but he's a very, very effective politician. And he had some Democrats working on his behalf. He was running against John Corzine, who was a very, very weak governor at the time, with the Turnpike monetization plan right before the election. And with all of those advantages that Chris Christie had, he barely squeaked out a victory against John Corzine. And the state since then has become more Democratic. So to say that 2021 or 2025, when you had unique situations around Phil Murphy or the presidential stuff, speaks to the state becoming more purple, I just don't see that as reality.
Do you think that one of the things is that we might interpret this election as is a need for more moderate candidates on the Democratic side? Is that how you're going to get unaffiliated voters, independents, come over?
No, I think you need to give people a reason to vote for your platform. You could be progressive. If you're articulating a vision, it'll resonate with people. If you think about, let's say, Bernie Sanders and having rallies with tens of thousands of people, it's because they viewed him as authentic and sincere in articulating a vision that people wanted to vote for. You could do that if you're progressive. You could do that if you're centrist. There's an authenticity conversation that has to be kind of had at the end of the day. Do people trust you and think that you're being authentic? You can't stage door knocking, stage phone calls. It's not 2004. It's about being sincere and authentic to who you are, and people see that for what it is. So no, I don't see that as being the case.
One of the things that I talk about with people is if you look at some of the challenges Democrats have had, nationally, it's when people pick candidates for you and you don't like the choice that you're given. There are some people that adore Hillary Clinton, but there are many who think that she got pushed on everybody without a real process, that the field sort of got cleared for her, and that she may have been the only one who could actually lose to Donald Trump. Joe Biden, everybody got tired of this 20-person circus on the stage, and they all said, all right, let's all get together. We'll make it Biden. Harris won the Democratic nomination for president in a couple hours. Are Democrats better off just not being afraid of elections and going out there like you and others are going to do in the primary, and just say, here's what we stand for, pick one of us, but not have it sort of prearranged?
I think primaries are healthy and a necessity. We're supporting candidates on the assembly front. Next week, we're rolling out a huge batch of assembly candidates. I think we have 9 or so that are coming out next week publicly. I think primaries sharpen candidates. I've been doing this for a year, and I do these meet and greets, and I get better every time at understanding what connects and what doesn't connect, and messaging. Primaries are good for that. Kamala had 100 days. I don't think there was a candidate in America that could have sharpened the message and gotten to the point where they're battle tested in 100 days. She was dealt a really tough hand. Primaries are very good. Primaries are healthy for the party. Primaries should happen everywhere, and that's why we're pushing it in 2025 across the board. And I think it's the right thing to do to build a better party in New Jersey.
Let me let Joey jump in if he's got anything.
Jump in to say what?
Jump in.
Jump in to say that primaries are bad.
Primaries are bad. I don't know. I have to tell you, when I
look,
go ahead.
I think just let me say one other thing on the primary front. I think Andy Kim did a huge service to New Jersey that people don't even realize. That
one of you's got to mute again. You're back to the sound problem.
I've got it. Because it's far beyond the just the line. The line has created apathy in the political structure for decades, where there has been no primary opposition because the line has given such a huge advantage to incumbents. So they've created the system where they're not necessarily the best candidates that are battle tested, that can articulate a message, that have a vision. So getting rid of that line will lead to better candidates, better democracy, better accountability. And that'll start next year. So primaries are important. And when people push back on me about primaries, I always cite the fact that if there's anything that we learned through this whole Biden process in the last year, is that primaries are essential. A primary in the Democratic presidential election would have gotten us to a much better place for sure, because whoever would have been the nominee would have been sharper. The energy at the base would have been better. Even though she had energy, it would have been even better. And primaries achieve all of those things. So I always say what we're doing is healthy. And even if you don't like the fact that we're primarying people, you should appreciate the fact that primaries are good for the party.
And I go back to Joe Biden and his decision to run, followed by his decision not to run. How costly was that? How costly was it that people weren't able to convince the president not to run earlier than they did?
Yeah, I think a lot of leadership in Washington that deals with him day in, day out, and could see that he was diminished, share the responsibility. It's not Joe Biden's fault. It's the people that covered it up for 2 years and pretended that what people were seeing on TV wasn't actually happening. So that's part of the blame there. Once we were down the road with Joe Biden, I think it was hard to substitute him out. I think that in some ways was not the best decision. Per your point, a short runway of 100 days and the quick switch wasn't something that resonated with people. If they had the amount of money that they had in the campaign, it might have been better off to pivot and just channel that into messaging around the House and Senate a little bit more about checks and balances. Instead, we pivoted away, had a different presidential candidate with a huge headwind, tried to get her over the goal line, and the collateral damage of that may be losing all 3 branches of government as a result of that decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, this has been a phenomenal election, and I want to ask Joey, and Mayor, you're welcome to stay around as long as you want and join us in this discussion.
I got 3 kids. I want to see them before they go to bed.
I know you do.
5, 4, and 1. So I'm going to get out of here in a second.
I appreciate you coming on. Joey, talk about, I mean, you wrote a great story about Hispanic voter trends, and we're going to see a lot more of your maps, hopefully over the next couple months as these results come in. But what are you seeing? I mean, you and I, we had Harris winning New Jersey in double digits. What do you see as you analyze these results? What's going on?
I mean, what I'm seeing is what people are seeing, I think, all over the country, which is, you can sort of single out individual trends, but the basic overall look of the picture is that pretty much everywhere shifted towards Republicans. Like there was not this is not 2016 or 2020 where there were these sort of countervailing trends where you had some parts of just in New Jersey, you know, in 2016, you had suburbs moving left while South Jersey moved right. In 2020, you had the suburbs keep on moving left while some Hispanic areas moved right. This time is just kind of all to the right. And so I wrote a story about how Hispanic towns in particular saw that movement really, really intensely, where you saw towns like, you know, Passaic, the city of Passaic has long been a Democratic town. It voted for Donald Trump. Or North Bergen, you know, usually gives Democrats 40 percentage point or 50 percentage point margins, is down to 7 points for Harris. So that is extreme, even within the context of this kind of unusual election. And so, yeah, this story was about kind of what exactly caused that. And it's, you know, do Democrats know how to message anymore to Latino voters? How can they get these voters back in the future, et cetera, et cetera? But that is ultimately sort of the most acute symptom of what is clearly a broader problem, where pretty much everywhere in the state had some level of rejection for Democrats. I found one town so far, Delaware, that shifted from Trump in 2020 to Harris in 2024. So it is not completely and utterly uniform, but it really is just everything looks not great for Democrats.
Joey, could I just say one thing before I get out of here? Like, yeah. So first of all, I love your maps and I appreciate them. I don't even know how you do them, but they are terrific. Okay. I would say you just referenced North Bergen. I think it's a great point because it was like 10,000 to 9,000. It was like a really close number. Union City was like 10,000 to 7,000, some sort of like really close number as well. I don't think any reasonable person would say that that's going to be a consistent outcome as it relates to general election politics in those two municipalities in 25 and beyond. It was an anomaly. So when Republicans say, well, now we're a purple state, you're looking right there at 17,000 votes that probably are not reliable in your purple status, really. And that's why I go back to the fact that it was an anomaly based on messaging and strategy and circumstances. And I think 2025 will be very different. So, but with that, I want to say, David, thank you. Micah, it was a really great event with the students. And Joey, keep up the good work, okay?
Thanks for joining us, Mayor.
Thanks,
guys.
Mayor.
I'm going to walk them out. I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
I mean, so I guess I'll respond to what the mayor said in absentia. I think I agree maybe 75% of the way, where I would not necessarily be so confident in calling this year an anomaly, because we never know what an anomaly is, right? 2020, trends among Hispanic voters in 2020 seemed a little bit like an anomaly. It didn't really match up with what the rest of the country was doing. So people, you know, some people were keen to dismiss it as like, well, this is just the particular circumstances of the pandemic and the stimulus checks and whatever. And then it super wasn't an anomaly. I mean, that's part of now a longer term trend of Latino voters shifting right. So I don't think that we can say conclusively whether any of what happened in New Jersey this year is anomalous or indicative of what's to come. But what I will say is I think Republicans who are really excited about these numbers also have to see the kind of warning signs for how these aren't necessarily reliable numbers, where they're getting a lot of support, seemingly. I mean, we don't know the exact profile of their voters or of Trump voters, but it seems like Trump got a lot of support from A, voters who voted still for Democratic congressional candidates, and B, voters who didn't vote for Congress at all and who just voted the top of the ticket and then skipped everything else, figured their job was done. So it seems like there is sort of a lot of these gains came from what I guess I would call unreliable supporters, where it's people who came out and gave this really strong result to Republicans this year. But if you just sort of assume that that automatically transfers over into 2025, when the Democrats at the top of the ticket will be different, the turnout model will be very different, the types of voters who powered a lot of Republican victories this year will not be coming to the polls at all. I mean, I think that Republicans have to be wary of that, because I agree with Mayor Fulop that losing North Bergen by 1,000 votes or whatever that is probably not realistic in a gubernatorial year when things just, the incentive structure is totally different for both the politicians and the voters involved.
You know, I look at these numbers and I'm looking at your map now. So North Bergen, Harris won by 7 points. Union City, right next door, also a Hispanic majority town, Harris won by 17. 17 is 10 points more than 7. How is it that
well, but importantly, Union City had a more Democratic starting point, where Union City voted for Biden by 44 points and North Bergen voted for Biden by, Union City for Biden by 44 points, North Bergen for Biden by 34 points. So it's not just this year that Union City Democrats and Brian Stack managed to hold off the wave. That's a longer term thing of Union City just being a bluer city at its core. Just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah. Michah, do you think that there is an issue among Hispanic voters, Hispanic men, about the gender issue? That Hispanic men might be less ready for a woman president than other demographic groups?
I think there were a whole bunch of people who were affected by that, who felt that way. Maybe a lot of people who weren't even aware that they felt that way. I think it's an unconscious thing. I think there were a lot of conscious reasons why the Latino community was not happy with the campaign that they saw. I think the assumption that MSG and the comments about the Puerto Rico island of garbage, the assumption that was going to change their vote, I think was a poor assumption on the Democrats' part, and probably offensive to people, because I think, they were concerned about the issues that everybody else is concerned about. I said in Joey's story about kitchen table story issues, about economic issues, about inflation. So talk to us about the stuff that we're concerned about, not about something that we clearly recognized was a joke, right? Now, you can argue that it was an offensive joke, but it's not going to be the basis on which we are going to base our vote. I think there were other issues like that. I think that, and they're not all coming to mind at the second, but there, I think the assumption that immigration, and this goes back, this is a problem Democrats have had for a number of years, the assumption that because they were immigrants, they are going to be concerned about going easy on illegal immigrants is maybe the opposite of the case, right? And we got here legally, and so everybody else should get here legally too, and we don't have a lot of sympathy for those who don't, right? So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about how to message and how to do policy and how to create policy that matters to them. And I think you got to go back to square one. And I think part of this, maybe if we don't want to generalize, maybe if we want to make it specific to this race, is that because of Biden's communication problems and his cognitive problems as he went on into his people, the people around him, the people that Harris inherited, were so cautious, were so overly cautious, didn't want to say anything about anything. And she got that was the campaign she inherited. That was the caution that she inherited. And I don't think that it didn't feel authentic to, I think, many communities, but I think in the Latino community, there was just a sense you weren't putting enough on the bone. You weren't giving them enough of a reason, I think, to vote for her.
So Joey, this is not just the numbers in statewide. This is not just about Latino voters. This is a much bigger picture. What else happened? I mean, what else happened throughout the state that had Donald Trump overperform? And how much of it was just that nobody really ran a campaign, that Jersey was an exporter state and they were busing volunteers to Pennsylvania. And is this just what happens when you don't try?
Well, I mean, that was a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I will be a lot more knowledgeable about this election in a week or two when I've gone through, because I've been sort of frantically trying to add election results to my spreadsheet. But I've only got a couple of counties covered at this point. So I can tell you a lot about what happened in like Passaic and Bergen and Morris counties. But I'm still working through a lot of the others. So if you ask me what happened in South Jersey, I don't know yet. I've been only looking at that in the broad strokes. I think that in general, yes, the sort of in places where Democrats really tried, I think this election we didn't know it at the time, and I'm not trying to add any sort of retroactive inevitability to it, but I think this election maybe just wasn't really all that winnable of a one for Democrats to begin with. I think that you've seen, I was looking at a data point about, incumbent parties in different countries around the world and how these sort of recent waves of inflation and cost of living increases have just made it rough for all of them, regardless of ideology. And, that was sort of before the election, that was kind of one data point of many that were pointing in different directions. We didn't know how the election was going to turn out. Now, in retrospect, we can kind of say, well, I guess it makes sense maybe that Democrats just lost this. I don't think that Harris ran necessarily a bad campaign, but I think it wasn't a campaign that was able to get enough people over the finish line for her. And her party and the fact that Biden is currently the president just were such a boondoggle. And, obviously, votes are still being counted, but I was seeing some statistic about how swing states shifted an average of 3 points towards Republicans, whereas blue states shifted an average of 6 points towards Republicans, or something like that. In New Jersey, it was more like 11 points. So maybe more like 10 points once all the votes are counted. So I think that clearly you have if Kamala Harris had decided to spend $40 million competing for New Jersey, then you probably would not have seen quite the sort of calamitous results that you saw. And you have a little bit of evidence of that in a couple of counties, like Gloucester County, which I would have figured in any statewide sort of terrible result for Democrats would be deep, deep red, ended up looking kind of okay for Democrats. Harris didn't lose it by very much. Andy Kim managed to win it. Democrats might reclaim the sheriff's office. And that was a county where Democrats really tried. They were heavily invested in winning those county offices. That was a real campaign specifically localized to Gloucester County. And you can kind of see the effects of that. And the 7th congressional district, which is the most heavily fought congressional district in the state, did not end up being super close in the congressional level. I think Tom Kane is going to end up winning by around 6 points. But again, the shifts were more muted there. You didn't have these massive rebellions against Democrats in Hunterdon County and Morris County. It was more of sort of a normal, like, okay, shift a couple points to the right type election. It's a very rambling answer, but I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing statewide is Hispanic voters are the biggest flashing alarm. Most places looking pretty bad, but a couple of specifically competitive places are kind of the rosiest by comparison for Democrats.
So let's jump into the 7th district, because there's no shortage of analysis nationally, and I want to talk about New Jersey. I mean, there was one public poll for the 7th, and it showed the race within the margin of error. It's going to turn out to be right now. It's about 6.5 points. And Kane's up a little under 28,000 votes. I mean, Michah, was this ever close? Or, when you see, I mean, you see 28,000 votes, that's not Andy Kim MacArthur. What happened in the 7th? Why did it turn out to not be the tight race that everybody thought it would?
Yeah, I'm not a pollster, and you and I have discussed many times that I'm very happy not to be a pollster, and I would not want to be a pollster in this environment, especially. But fundamentally, I think that what pollsters got wrong, and then what the rest of us got wrong, is understanding who the electorate was going to be. And that's the main problem. If you're polling for an electorate that you think is 2020 and it doesn't wind up being 2020, then you're screwed, right? And so I think what pollsters didn't know was going to happen was that 500,000, apparently at this count, right? But apparently 500,000 of Harris's voters did not come out statewide that came out for Joe Biden 4 years ago. It looks to me, and that relatively speaking, Trump is going to be about where he was, or a little bit better, right? When we're still counting some of those last 7% of the votes that are out, but those are not largely in the 7th district. So I mean, to me, we needed to better understand, we needed to better guess, hit the mark on who the electorate was going to be. And to answer your question specifically about the 7th, if we knew that a good chunk of the people who came out for Tom Malinowski were not going to come out this time for Stu Altman or for Kamala Harris, then we could have better understood the race, and then maybe it wasn't ever so close.
And one of the things, go ahead, Joey, because I wanted to point one thing out and then go, which is, I spent the entire year not trying to avoid looking at 2020 turnout numbers, because that was an anomaly. That was the COVID election. Mm-hmm. They mailed a ballot to every registered voter. Mm-hmm. And we saw record turnout from that? I mean, is that really what it is? Is that when you take ballots out of people's kitchens and say, okay, now you have to go to the polls, even though there were 9 days of early voting and that really took off, and we'll talk about that later. But is it, was it a mistake for people who looked at 2020 and say, and not realize that was an all VBM election?
Joey,
I'm going to make the point. I'm going to quickly make the point I was originally going to make, which is I want to defend Patrick Murray at the Monmouth Polling Institute's honor a little bit here. His poll wasn't really wrong. His poll, as he would be happy to tell you, is super within the sort of normal bounds of error for a poll. Where he had Kane,
and he gives different turnout scenarios. Right.
Kane, he had Kane up by 2. Kane is going to end up winning by 6. Mm-hmm. That's like relatively standard.
Yeah,
polling.
True.
And especially he had in the same poll in the 7th district, he had Trump up by 1. So my calculations have Trump leading by 2.5 in the 7th district. So that was almost spot on. I mean, I think that the polls that really kind of threw us off in New Jersey were the couple of statewide polls that were just sort of signaling like, business as usual election, where it was, the lowest one was not Biden, Harris plus 12, and the highest was Harris plus 20. Those were kind of like giving us the idea that this is like the normal band of outcomes in New Jersey. And then it super wasn't. I mean, the Harris plus 20 poll that's 15 points off. So that's definitely not within the normal bounds of polling problems. No. And then turnout, I mean, I was not at the Globe yet for 2020, so I can't specifically speak to that election. But I think it's clear that some of Democrats' problem was turnout issues. But I mean, it's also you can't look at Harris's total now, or I guess you say you can't look at Trump's total now and Trump's total in 2020 and say because they're similar, that's probably all the same voters. Like Trump also probably lost some of his 2020 voters, but then some Biden voters shifted over to Trump. Like I think you've got a combination here of Democrats did not have great turnout, but I think also some Democratic voters, and my guess is a disproportionate number of unaffiliated voters broke for Trump. Just that seems to be the biggest trend line of this is people who are not sharply, because I think that, both Republicans and Democrats beforehand could have honestly said, our base is pretty happy. Like I'm talking to voters who are like a core part of our base and they're like, yeah, I'm for Harris. Yeah, I'm for Trump. There's not massive issues here. But among voters who are less sort of specifically tied to party labels, people who are less specifically invested in politics, I think that's where a lot of those switchover votes came from. The thing about elections is it's always a little bit imprecise. And so we don't know for sure exactly what motivated any voter or where the exact paths of voters are. But that feels like it's sort of the most logically consistent explanation.
I think I don't want to single out Patrick either, because you're right. You're absolutely right that he gives different turnout scenarios and ranges, and he does that specifically to avoid the head-to-head. We all add it up ourselves, right, and come to that conclusion. But clearly, we're not just talking about that one because the Democrats saw something too, and presumably internals, right, that they saw improving. All along they had said there wasn't a reason for the jump in, and then they jumped in. So they saw something as well. And I just think again, fundamental misunderstanding of what was going on. Yeah.
I think can we agree that both candidates, Tom Kane, Sue Altman, they ran really good campaigns. You can't blame this on one of the candidates. This is what elections are supposed to be, which is two good campaigns, present themselves to voters, and then the voters decide which one they want.
Yeah, I mean,
that's true. Oh yeah,
go ahead, Joey. Go ahead.
I think that the evidence points towards Kane doing a better job than Altman of sort of convincing voters that he was worth breaking from the party line for, right? Like, both candidates really worked to define themselves as sort of the real moderate of the race and their opponent as the extremist. I mean, Altman hit Kane over and over on abortion and on, the sort of right-wing things that Congress is passing. And then Kane hit Altman over her past comments at working families and these various progressive issues. And the little bit of polling that we saw in the lead up to the election kind of indicated that Altman had successfully closed the gap between herself and Harris, where there wasn't going to be the same situation where, if Harris wins the district, but then Altman loses because there's enough crossover votes for Kane. But then that gap ended up being maybe a little bit wider than we expected. It's ending up at about a 4-point gap. So even if Harris had won the district by as much as Biden did in 2020, it probably wouldn't have been quite enough to get Altman across the finish line. So I think ultimately the Kane campaign's messaging was a bit more of a success than the Altman campaign's, because he managed to keep that gap alive when Altman was really, really trying to close it. But he could have won anyways because Trump was carrying the district. So that's sort of only quibbling about the margin at the end and sort of a woulda, coulda, shoulda, because I don't think that there was any scenario in which Trump won this district, but we get Congresswoman Altman. Like that was just that was never really on the table.
And I think we should probably, and I don't mean the three of us, present company excluded, but we should probably stop this idea that, Kane isn't making, he isn't making smart choices. He's just tying himself to Trump, right? He understands what's going to move his district. And he was right. I mean, ultimately his decisions were validated, right? It wasn't an accident. I think for him, the question may come at some point, and this is a complete hypothetical, if the district is not quite where the presidential nominee is, what does he do then? Is he just going to hitch his wagon to them or not? I mean, but so far his the way he has dealt with Trump, which comes under heavy criticism from the chattering class, I think is pretty validated.
I will say though, I mean, like I think that it's too early to say what the 2026 midterm environment will look like, so we can't talk about it with any level of specificity. But I will say that any Republicans who are feeling like really, really good about it and really like, oh yeah, we're going to be fine, are fooling themselves, because a Trump plus 2.5 district in a midterm election with Trump in the White House that's in trouble. Like there's no way. I mean, we'll see whether Democrats decide to target the district. We'll see who steps up to run, whether Altman runs again, whether Malinowski runs again. We'll see what the race looks like. But just on a fundamental level, this is a district that votes now about in line with the nation, because the national popular vote is going to end up being something like, I don't know, I haven't been tracking it specifically, but I think 1 or 1.5 points in Trump's favor. So this is only barely more Republican than the nation. Theoretically, if you have Democrats win the House popular vote by 3 points in 2026, not a huge margin, that would just on a baseline level mean that this district goes blue. So that's something that, I mean, when Kane ran for the seat in 2020, and then when he ran again and won in 2022, he did so having to know that this would never be like, he would never get to be just sort of a laid back, safe seat, easygoing congressman. That was never going to be the deal here, and it's not going to be in 2026. I don't think.
And he's not going to be able to do what he has. None of them in the House, none of the House Republicans are going to be able to do what I think they've been fairly decent at in under the Biden years, which is everybody gets to have their issue of difference with the caucus. Everybody has to, gets their issue of, their moment where they get to be independent on the thing that really matters to them or to their district. Trump's not going to truck that. You're not going to, you're not going to get away with that for the next 2 years. You're going to toe the line, or you're going to get attacked by him. So, maybe it gets harder from here for Kane. Kane has never served while Trump was president before.
Yeah. And I mean, there's sort of the corollary to that, but slightly different, is there were a lot of things that the House did successfully pass that didn't go anywhere because of the Senate and the White House, that now if the House passes that, it might get signed into law, and then they have to answer for cutting appropriations to this and this program, or banning pride flags there or whatever. That hasn't really broken through to voters because it didn't actually happen. And as much as Democrats might have attacked Republicans for taking these votes, voters don't care all that much about votes that don't do anything. But now if those votes do something, then that's definitely going to be a spot of danger as well.
Mm-hmm. And look, we don't have the final House numbers. People are believing that Republicans will continue to control the House, but not by much. And there's not a lot of room to give anybody a pass. And and one other thing I wanted to ask Joey about the 7th. So Kane in 2020, different district, a district that was more Democratic than it is now. He got 214,000 votes, and he's at 216 now. Malinowski got 219. He's at 189. Does that show us that, does that illustrate the previous point that Republicans continue to come out and a lot of Democrats just stayed home?
Well, that wasn't really my point. I was making the opposite point, that a lot of people who previously voted for Democrats just switched their votes.
Voted for Republican.
Combination of turnout and persuasion. Can you say the numbers again? I wasn't fully following what point you were making.
So Kane in 2020 in the old 7th, he got 214,000 votes, and that translated to 49%. This time he's at 216, relatively the same, and more votes are still going to get counted. But he's relatively even, but his percentage is 3 points higher.
Right.
Altman got 189,000 votes, which was 46%. Malinowski got 219, which got him to 52. So she actually ran 6 points behind Malinowski in a district that arguably is more Republican. Yeah, that's not right, because that's right because it's more Republican. But what is what I'm trying to figure out?
If you just look at the towns that are in both districts, I think that Kane may have done the best of his 3 runs still in 2020. I'll have to look at 2020 versus this year. I think that those two are going to be kind of similar. But I mean, if Kane was running in this district in 2020, he would have won, and he would have probably won by a fairly decent margin. I mean, as for the sort of raw vote counts, I think it's sort of what I said before, where yes, I think that Altman, like Democrats everywhere, probably had a few turnout issues, but I think more important were A, the few Kamala Harris voters who decided to also vote for Tom Kane Jr., and B, the sort of less hyper engaged voters who might have voted for Biden in 2020 but are now voting for Trump and Republicans this year.
So Micah, let me ask, we'll stay with this and maybe some Harris voters voted for Kane. We're 250 years into the Kane family's involvement in American politics. Was it, it's a brand. It really is. The Kanes are a brand in politics that goes back a very long time.
We have a university with their name on it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you do. You have I guess the question I'm trying to posit is was it just impossible for Democrats to label a Kane as an extremist because that's just not what the brand is?
I do think that the Democrats need to figure that one out. I don't know that people, so when you think about how the Republicans did it, right? When they started calling people a liberal, it wasn't just calling people a liberal. It was with a sneer, right? It was like they're a liberal, right? And it's everything that went with that. I'm not quite sure that extremist has the same connotation. And you're right in that it's sort of easy to get out from under that if it's not what people understand about you, or if it's what people understand about your name or about your family. And if you want to define it, you're going to have to define it better. You're going to have to do more than just we saw this with fascist, right? Fascist is a terrible thing. Maybe it's even a description that fits, right? But it's not something that people necessarily understand. The same thing that you mean isn't the same thing that they get, right? It's two different things, right? And so I think extremist is one that Democrats have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what they want to call people. Maybe they need to do some more name calling. Maybe they need to figure out how to be more descriptive about it, but I don't think it's really hitting home. And when somebody can get out from under it, it's not going to hit home.
I think I lost you, Micah.
Oh,
should I log out and log back in?
No, he's fine on my end. Maybe it's David. Well, I'm just going to talk about that point, which is I mean, I tend to agree that I feel like I forget exactly in what context we brought this up last week, if we brought it up at all, or maybe I'm imagining that. As David mentioned at the beginning of this, we're all running on minimal sleep here.
Yeah.
But like labels are effective when they and narratives in politics are effective when they latch onto something that people already kind of believe, right? Like when you take something that people instinctively, when you have a genuinely right-wing Republican who has really, really extreme views on abortion, or, you know, says the 2020 election was stolen, or what have you, then latching on to that and saying this person is an extremist who we can't allow into Congress or whatever, it won't necessarily win you the election if it's not a favorable district, but it'll catch because it's true. Or at least it's true enough in the minds of voters who say, well, you know, I may be a moderate, but I certainly don't think the 2020 election was stolen, or whatever, that it'll kind of, it'll take on a life of its own. You won't need to sort of force it. If you're forcing it, then it won't stick as well, because people are going to be, anyone who's heard of Tom Kane Jr. before and who doesn't already have a negative reaction to him, which many people do have a negative reaction to him. I mean, the guy always has many people voting against him because, you know, he's a Republican in a district with lots of Democrats, and that's just what happens. But when you try to take someone who has a brand as not all that extreme, pretty mild-mannered, you know, maybe even so mild-mannered that was itself a line of attack, which you can talk about whether those two lines of attack didn't really mesh all that well together. But that's always going to be a challenge for any Democrat who runs against him. It's a challenge for Malinowski in both 2020 and 2022. It's a challenge for Altman this year. It's going to be a challenge for anyone in 2026, or if he wins that and beyond. Just how do you get voters to come to the realization that they're trying to push that he is in fact an extremist, when clearly voters do not necessarily view him that way to begin with.
And I think your point was a really, really important one, which is that there's nothing that inoculates you with every voter, right? It's a question of how many voters can you move? And clearly Altman moved lots and lots of voters, but I mean, and
that's kind of the thing about American elections in general, is we're at a nation of hyper-competitive elections. We're not somewhere like Great Britain where you can see a party gain or lose 30 percentage points. I mean, fundamentally, the vast majority of Trump voters from 2020 voted for Trump this year, and the vast majority of Biden voters voted for Harris this year. Like, this is a nation where, and, you know, it was, if you sort of just smooth it out, it's a 50-50 election in both 2020 and 2024, just with Democrats controlling everything one time and Republicans controlling everything the other time, because of about 4 percentage points, 5 percentage points worth of difference. So that's sort of, you're always going to be having to duel on the margins with those kinds of things.
So let's go to the ninth district.
So I just want to, my first comment on that is going to be, if you told any of us this phrase at the beginning of this year, Trump District Congresswoman Nellie Poe, we would all say, what in God's name are you talking about?
Yeah, it certainly is interesting. I mean, that turned out to be, right now at least, I shouldn't say turned out to be, but right now, that's the closest race in the state. Right? It wasn't the seventh. It's not the second or the third or the fifth or the 11th. It's a district that was drawn to re-elect Bill Pascrell that nobody really thought was going to be a problem. And now, you know, second cycle in a row, we're looking at, like, holy crap, Billy Prempa came within, 10 points, 11 points in 2022. Now it's holy crap, look at Billy Prempa. He is really, really tight. And what, Trump carried Passaic County. Trump carried South Bergen. I don't know the final numbers.
So I do. I don't know what the
okay, so tell me.
I've done the calculations. It's
okay.
Around Trump 49%, Harris 48%. So it's a little bit over a point for Trump. That might tighten even a little bit more to maybe less than a point if there's still, I'm not exactly sure how many votes there still are outstanding, but I've noticed that the recent vote additions that we've seen, like today and late yesterday, have tended to pad Democrats' margin a little bit. So if that continues, then you might see that get even closer. But I think that most likely you're going to end up with this being a Donald Trump won district, which, just so that if people don't have the partisan baseline in their minds, this was a Joe Biden plus 19 district. And I think, let me check how much it was for Hillary Clinton in 2016, because even Joe Biden's performance was kind of anemic. Yeah, it was Hillary Clinton plus 24. So in 8 years, we've shifted 25 points to the right. This is a district that was specifically drawn to be more Republican in order to help out Josh Gottheimer and Mikey Sherrill, who now are winning re-election by way bigger margins than Nellie Poe is in this district. I mean, like in 2022, when we saw that unusual result where Billy Prempa came within 11 points of winning, it sort of put the district on a lot of people's radars, but it had a relatively clear explanation for it, which was that, South Bergen and Passaic County didn't have amazing trends for Democrats, but more importantly, turnout was just very poor in the Democratic portions of the district. Latino voters were not coming out in a midterm. And we kind of figured, well, Passaic County kind of tends to do its own thing in midterms, and then in presidential years, it gets back into its normal mode of being. So we were sort of operating on a baseline that turned out to be faulty, where, Latino voters came out, but a huge number of them voted for Trump. And that just totally changed the partisan math of the district.
Yeah, Mikey, you seem to want to get in it. Yeah.
No, I continue to be confounded by the Passaic County Democrats. Now, now some of this, I realize when I am hard on Democrats, the job that they did this week. And what they didn't do. I realize that when trends move against them, they clearly feel like, get out of the way. They're not, it wasn't them. They were in national headwinds, right? You hear that all the time. I mean, that was basically Norcross's, his analysis and his argument as to what was going wrong in Steve Sweeney's, in Steve Sweeney's time was that national headwinds were moving against him. Although that wasn't top of the ticket, that wasn't a presidential election year. But this is not the first time that we're saying that Passaic County Democratic turnout is anemic. This is the worst of the worst, right? We've talked about this in the context of Newark. We've talked about where else there's light urban turnout across the state, but Passaic is the worst of the worst. And if they're not careful, and at some point they're going to have to wake up. I mean, they woke up for Jerry Speziale. They came out in the primary, but if they aren't taking care of their generals, they're going to start losing. They're going to start losing other office holders up and down the line if they're not careful.
And I mean, this is kind of the perfect warning. In some ways, this was kind of, for both Passaic Democrats and for Democrats statewide, this was kind of the perfect warning shot off the bow. Because at the end of the day, they didn't lose much. They didn't lose any congressional seats. They weren't like super, super close to losing any congressional seats either. I mean, Nellie Poe is going to end up winning by something like 4.5-5 percentage points. That is way closer than anyone expected, but it's also not the kind of thing where it's like a true coin flip. Like, that's a healthy enough margin. If we had known that was going to be a toss-up seat to begin with, we would say, oh, that's pretty decent. She's outperforming Trump by 6 points. And then, on a county level, Passaic Democrats not only held their seats, they flipped a Republican-held seat, even as Trump was carrying the county. Mm-hmm. And Gloucester Democrats managed to flip the sheriff's seat. Cumberland, the Cumberland County clerk, a Democratic Cumberland County clerk, Celeste Riley, seems to have won re-election. I haven't done a super deep drill down into local results, but I have not really heard people talking about like a total wipeout for Democrats in town races either. So this year was kind of like, hey, Democrats, if you don't work on this, then this is what it's going to look like over and over again. And you're going to start feeling some real pain. But now we're going to let you off with a warning. We're going to make Harris win the state by 6 points, but we'll let you keep all the stuff that you currently hold. And don't worry, we're just going to slap you on the wrist this time, but watch out. So we'll kind of see 25 whether they figure that out.
I mean, I look at Nellie Poe, and this was, this was not easy for either Senator Poe or Billy Prempa, in the sense that this just doesn't happen often when a longtime incumbent congressman dies 8 days before the deadline to fill his seat, and Poe had to run a 1 week campaign to get the nomination. And then she starts with $0, no real name ID outside of her legislative district, and quite frankly, and this is just the way it is. She's had a safe general election since 1997. So she's really not had to go out there and she's never been on TV. She really hasn't, she hasn't, done a whole lot of radio. She hasn't done, an incredible number of mailings. Maybe it's possible that on his third try, Billy Prempa may have gone into, and he's worked hard. He's not stopped since maybe late 2019, early 2020. Maybe he's better known, and maybe this was just like every factor about this has just put this in an odd situation. There's just nothing normal about it. But here's my question, Mike. I'll start with you, and we look at what's next, right? Nellie Poe is going to Congress, and it's that old joke. What do you call a woman who wins a seat in Congress narrowly? You call her Congresswoman. So she's going to be there. But I think back to Bill Pascrell from the day Trump won until his death. Bill Pascrell did nothing but hammer Donald Trump. That was, that was his thing. He was good at it. He was passionate about it. How does Nellie Poe go to Washington and become a reliable vote for leadership representing a district that Donald Trump won?
Yeah, and we absolutely know with certainty, as you look ahead, that this is going to be, a Republican target, in 2 years. I mean, there's no question about it that they're coming after her in all the, you're going to make a list of all the districts that Trump won where there's a Democratic member, and that's where you're going to start. I mean, that's how it works. And so she will have a target on her back. And, I give her a lot of credit. I said this at the time. She didn't have to come to our debate. She didn't have to, she didn't have to do that. But I think if she wants to carve out this profile, she hasn't been a fighter. You're absolutely right. She hasn't been somebody who's, scrappy like Bill Pascrell was. But the Democratic Party is going to need national spokespeople to be on the front lines with this outreach that they're going to have to do to Hispanic voters. And if she wants to take that mantle and run with it, then she can carve out some space for herself and distinguish herself in a way that she can come back to the district, similar to the way that Pascrell did. She won't be Bill Pascrell, but she can be a national figure on Hispanic issues and on Hispanic outreach and come back to the district and make that her platform.
Joey, she's got a go ahead.
Well, it's worth noting that she, there is evidence that who knows really whether it was individual campaigns that accomplished this or whether it was just sort of voters behaving a little bit irrationally, as they oftentimes do with splitting their tickets. I think it was a combination of the two. But she won the city of Passaic by 9 points while Trump was carrying it by 6. She won Patterson by 43 points when Harris was carrying it by 30. She markedly improved, not just sort of on the edges, but seriously had better numbers in Hispanic areas. They weren't the kind of numbers the Democrats would want in this district, and she'll be wanting to improve that for future years. I think that 2026 provides her a good opportunity to do so. I think that if she had won by a similar margin to what she's winning by, but Harris had won nationwide, then, oh boy, she's in for a really rough 2026. Because Trump is in the White House, it's really uncommon for members, even in districts carried by the opposite party's president. It's really, really uncommon for incumbents to lose re-election when a president of the opposite party is in power. You usually have to get very specific factors for that to happen. So I think that, unless those specific factors start emerging, 2026 might be a little bit of an easier year for her. But just this year, she did seem to have some of that persuasive power. Perhaps some of it came purely from the fact that she is herself Latina. She's New Jersey's first Latina congresswoman. And that can oftentimes help in those communities. Any community. I think I was saying something about how Andy Kim in the Senate race, we haven't brought him up actually really yet, but he was doing way better in Korean American areas, which there are fewer of those in New Jersey, but in the couple of towns that are heavily Korean American, those swung towards Trump, didn't really swing away from Kim. So that will be, that's an asset for her. I think it's probably a good thing that Democrats landed on a Hispanic candidate for this district, because that was a whole point of discussion during the process to choose Pascal's replacement. Given the way that this district has trended, they didn't realize it at the time, but that was probably that was some forward thinking there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she's going to have to go like other, and I'm sure this is not what was expected, but she's going to have to do what other freshman House members in districts where they're going to be on a target list. She's going to have to do her call time. She's going to have to spend a lot of time fundraising, which probably wasn't what people were expecting. I think and I think it's just going to be a different life for her there.
You got to give her credit. She did manage to raise $400,000 in
she did
a month and a half of a campaign that no one thought was going to exist until it did. So I'll give her some credit for that. She actually ended up being not a terrible fundraiser.
Yeah, no, but a short runway.
Yeah.
Now she's got the same 2 years as everybody else,
right?
And she's going to have to. I think she's going to have to be a different kind of freshman member of the House than people thought she would, simply because of the closeness of this district.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about
she doesn't have the same ability as Herb Conaway or Lamonic McIver of having a quiet first couple of terms to kind of figure out their place in the House and see where things are going. She's going to have to make a definition for herself fairly quickly.
So let's talk about the U.S. Senate race. I mean, this was, again, we got exactly what everybody thought we were going to get, which is that Andy Kim is now headed to the United States Senate. But just like everything else we've been talking about tonight, he didn't get there by the margin that everybody was expecting. This is, probably an easier answer given what we've talked about. But Joey, what, people thought he was going to be in the double digits, and he may be. It may turn out to be 10 at the end of this, but it's not 15. It's not close to 20. What was this?
I think it's the same thing that, you could ask that question about any Democratic victory or loss this year. It's just that the margins were wonky because the presidential margin was wonky. That is where it all begins and ends. I think that most polls had Kim outrunning Harris by a few percentage points, and that's exactly what he did. It's just the baseline that we were operating off of was really wrong. So instead of Harris winning by 14 and Kim winning by 18, we have Harris winning by 5 or 6 and Kim winning by 9 or 10. He clearly had some. I think I would say the same thing about him as I would say about Nellie Poe, or I would say about, we haven't talked about them, but like Josh Gottheimer and Mikey Sherrill both outperformed the top of the ticket by a fairly decent margin. I think that some of it was his own ability to persuade voters. I think that some of it was some voters just voting the top of the ticket and then piecing out. And I think some of it was there was clearly just a contingent of voters this year who liked Trump and then liked their local Democrats running for office. And it seems like Andy Kim was included among that select few for a lot of people. He carried Passaic County, he carried Gloucester County, he almost carried Cumberland County. He's putting up, I don't have immediate historical comparisons, but I have to assume this is like the strongest Democratic performance in Burlington County, which is his home county, in a statewide race in a really long time. He's winning it by 23, 24 percentage points. Mm-hmm. So, you asked me what caused his margin to be low, and I feel like my answer is ending up being the opposite thing, which is why is his margin so high. It's obviously lower than we were anticipating, I think that. And one thing I noticed is he's not really outrunning Harris in parts of North Jersey, like Hunterdon, Morris, Somerset. He's doing fairly similarly to Harris there. So he didn't necessarily break through in quite the same way. But I think that ultimately anybody this year who did better than Kamala Harris, even if they still underperformed expectations, what you should be talking about really is how they did better than Kamala Harris. And any Republican who did better than Donald Trump, like Tom Kane Jr., that's kind of what you have to be talking about there. The presidential is the baseline. And the reason why we're seeing a lot of the strange results we're seeing is purely because the baseline was only 5 points.
Yeah, I think that's right because somebody like Bob Casey just across the river, he performed almost exactly as Harris did, and that's a guy who not only has his own 3 terms that he in his household name, but his father, and so this is getting beyond the generic vote is really the question. How did you get not how did you get from her 5 points ahead in New Jersey? How did you get from 5 to 10? Right is really the is really the or whatever he winds up with is really the question. And I think it's all those things that Joey talked about. I wonder, and I hope you don't think this is unfair, but I think if it had been a different nominee, you'd probably be looking at somebody who was right in line with Harris. You'd be looking at the 5 points. I think he did bring something different to the table than what the generic Democratic performance wound up being.
Right. I mean, I wrote in the voters guide, and David, you and I have talked about this, how the 3 things that Republicans might have wanted for a competitive Senate race were Tammy Murphy as the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden as the presidential nominee, and Bob Menendez on the ballot. And the presidential race and the Senate race are close enough that I think that if 2 or 3 of those things had in fact come to pass, then yeah, we could be looking at a shockingly tight Senate race. Like if this was the baseline and then you shift it via all of those things as well, then that starts to get really dangerous for Democrats. And they should probably count themselves lucky that, Bob Menendez got convicted on all charges and resigned, and that Andy Kim, like kind of a proven battleground congressman was able to take up the mantle for the Senate.
Yeah. And he did win a district twice that Donald Trump did, also won. So he's sort of been accustomed to this race.
Andy Kim and Kelly Poe, the 2 Trump district Democratic Congress members from New Jersey. And Josh Gottheimer, actually. No, the 3 of them.
Yeah. Well, now Gottheimer, right.
Each year there was one.
Right.
It was Gottheimer,
right.
And then it was Kim, and now it's Poe.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating trio.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, so I've seen some people on Twitter talking about Trump carrying Gottheimer's district.
Yeah.
My math shows Harris carrying Gottheimer's district by about 1 point.
Okay.
And I think that she's going to maybe carry Cheryl's district by 6 points, something like that. Kim's old district, now Conway's district, by 6, 7, 8, something like that. I haven't done those calculations yet, but just eyeballing it, I don't think any of those are going to be hyper tight.
That's why when you guys talked about the map a few minutes ago and you said, Gottheimer and Cheryl, are getting bigger margins than Poe. Well, I can think of 2 members of Congress who are very happy with that they fought to get the map that they get, because this was exactly what they were trying to guard against, and the map did produce the result that it was intended to produce.
Yeah, I think with their overperformances, Cheryl and Gottheimer might have still won, even under the old map. I'll have to do some looking into that. Gottheimer, I think. Well, actually, now that I think he still would have. Cheryl, it's a little bit dicier. I'll have to do some math on that. But yeah, I mean, they clearly overperformed, and these districts are clearly, the funny thing about whenever you draw a map is, like, when you draw a map with partisan intent, is you can only draw it with partisan intent based on, the elections that you have already under your belt. Yeah. You have to hope that those elections will remain similar enough to the elections over the course of 10 years that it will work. Republicans got burned in a big way when they drew their map in 2011 that were like, oh yeah, well, this will help us keep 6 districts. And then it got so bad that they held only 1 at one point. And now already you're seeing the creaks and cracks in this map where Democrats definitely did a lot to help themselves. And they made it so that they still hold 9 districts when on a less favorable map, they can be down to 7 or 6 at this point with an election like this one. But you're also, when they drew it, they would have never expected that only 2 years later, Donald Trump would be carrying the 9th district. So we're already seeing the coalitions change enough that this map is getting a little wonky.
Yeah.
And, they would have run different campaigns too. If it was, you can't look at this year's scenario and say, well, this is how it would have been on a different map. Under the old map, both Gottheimer and Cheryl would have run this differently. So I want to ask, and this is not a district that was close, except that the numbers sort of startled me on the drop, and that is Rob Menendez in the 8th district, and he won by about 20 points. But, the last thing you ever want to do in politics is underwhelm and underperform. And 20 points is not what he should have won that district by. It seems to me, I'll tell you what at least has occurred to me is that as something that I missed watching this general is Rob Menendez had a tough primary. And he addressed the issue of his father, former Senator Menendez, who had not yet been convicted of a crime of bribery and other charges. And Rob Menendez convinced Democrats that he should remain their nominee. It had not occurred to me what kind of problem the Menendez name might have with independents who were coming out to vote this year, and that small number of Republicans. It looks to me like Rob Menendez took his foot off the gas the moment he won the primary. He stopped raising money of any consequence. He didn't go on TV. He didn't go on cable. He didn't go on. He really didn't. If he did any mailers, it was minimal. He didn't have a campaign operation. He didn't have a field operation. He didn't have anybody pulling votes out from him. He wasn't. He wasn't. And I'm not saying he didn't show up at events, but he was showing up at events. For Democrats and not really going after those people that he had not appeared in front of, since the time that his father got in trouble. He didn't make the case to independents that this is a different, he's a different Menendez than his father. So, I wonder how many independents didn't realize that this wasn't the former senator on the ballot for this office. He's Joey, jump in because I want to talk about this a little bit. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that was a factor for some voters, but I also think that yet again, it sort of ties back to the presidential race for me, where he's up by 25 points. I mean, just looking at the comparison between his totals and Harris's totals in the Latino towns that I was looking at for my story earlier today, he's doing better than she is. I think that, if he wins this district by 25 points, my guess is that Harris carried this district by around maybe 20 points or maybe even a little bit less.
Yeah. I think he's at 20 now. I think he's at about, I thought he was about 20 points.
Just looking at the New York Times.
But whatever, yeah.
Looking at the thing, it's 59-35.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a decent number of third-party votes there. So you do have to kind of wonder whether there's some Harris voters who decided to divert and vote against him because they were like, I don't want to vote for Menendez. What's that? But I also think it's a little bit unfair to talk about him underperforming when he, in fact, overperformed at the top, at least in the towns that I looked at. He's in fact overperforming the top of the ticket.
See, and Joey, I look at it, and I don't disagree with you a lot, but 59% of the vote is the worst performance by a Democratic congressional candidate in this Hudson County congressional district since 1976. And that was the year Joe LaFonte was the Speaker of the Assembly. It was running for an open congressional seat, and he had just shepherded Brendan Burns' income tax through the Assembly at a time when people knew who was doing what in Trenton. And he won by about 7,000 votes. He got less than 50%. And guess what? He was a one-term congressman. Frank Guarini, saw the blood there and sensed the opportunity. Guarini came in and said, "I'm running for Congress," and LaFonte was gone. So I'm saying that I think it was a mistake that Menendez didn't mount a campaign. That he settled in on the reliability, the entitlement of being a Democrat in Hudson County, in Elizabeth, in the north and east wards of Newark. And he just figured, well, I'm going to win. I'm not going to lose this district, and so I don't have to really raise money. I don't really have to run a full campaign. And look, he's going to Congress, and he's going to Congress with a healthy margin here. But it's under 60, and if he doesn't have that same coalition of people that are behind him, if he doesn't have Brian Stack, who is monumentally important in these races. If with that comes, he doesn't have Richie Turner, he doesn't have Albio Sures, and somebody else, not Ravi Bala, but somebody else step forward and says, there's a good opportunity here. I'm going to run for Congress. I think he is not in a general, but I think he's a vulnerable incumbent in a primary.
This goes back to, something I heard in other districts too, is Harris is going to take care of it, right? There's going to be this GOTV operate, this great, they're going to isolate, they're going to figure out who their voters are, and they're going to drive them out, right? I heard this in the 7th district. I heard this in other places. We're going to rely on the Harris GOTV. Harris GOTV operation was in Wisconsin. Harris GOTV was in Michigan, right? They weren't here. So you rely on them. You rely on the Hudson machine. Well, the Hudson machine, other than Brian Stack, it doesn't look like to me was fired up, right? I mean, let's face it. So this is you talked about going back to 76. I think the machines they work when they want to work, right? They operate when they want to operate, and when they don't, they are not firing up for anybody, him or anybody else. So yeah, I mean, maybe the mentality has to be for somebody like that. Well, if it's not coming from the president, if it's not coming from the machine, it's got to fall to me. I got to do this. I've got to do it myself, because I can't assume somebody else is going to do it for me.
And I mean, you have to assume that, because like the classic joke in New Jersey politics is, the average party chairman, the average county chairman or machine sort of party person cares a lot more about who is elected to a county commissioner seat this year than who's elected president.
Right.
That's where their levers of power lie. And so 2025 with the assembly and with the governor's office up is the big year for like every county party and every county chair and everybody in New Jersey. And so you have to assume that they'll activate in a way that they didn't really this year. But like the losses this year, not in terms of seats, but in terms of, sort of baseline partisanship and in terms of trust among a lot of voters, the losses for this year were significant enough that you have to kind of wonder whether they view that the fact that they took their foot off the gas this year as a miscalculation of, yes, we didn't actually lose, these Passaic County Commissioner seats, or we didn't actually lose Rob Menendez. He just got kind of an underwhelming margin. But, sort of the longer term trends of voters opting for a guy like Donald Trump, who, these Democrats, they're not hyper fired up about the presidential race, but your average Democratic Party person hates Donald Trump and finds him really abhorrent. And so then the idea that, Kearney is voting for Donald Trump and Bayonne almost is, and the city of Passaic is voting for Trump and this and that is sort of, it's a morale dampener, even if it doesn't actually correspond with any lost seats, just similar to how Rob Menendez only getting 59% of the vote is sort of, it's a bad look, even if it doesn't affect the balance of the House in any way.
And we know what the answer is. The answer is to do what Brian Stack does, which is you keep voters in practice, regardless of what is going on, right? The problem is they may hate Trump, but they also hate working. And so, for the most part, right, with the exception of Stack, right? Yeah. And so we know what they should do if they want to keep their machines oiled, but whether or not they actually want to do that and fire up for every election is a very different question.
Look, if everybody behaved like Brian Stack, nobody would ever lose an election. And we
have really
look at
scenarios where two Brian Stacks would face off against one another, and it's an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
You guys are describing Hudson County politics. Hudson County politics, when the machine is working, doesn't lose a race. And when there is an internecine fight, that's when there is two Brian. So you're describing Hudson to a T,
Yeah, and it's you talk about Congress. I mean, with the exception of Camden and Gloucester counties, there's not a county chair in the state that wouldn't trade a congressman for a sheriff. I mean, because congressmen, at the end of the day, what do congressmen do for a county organization? With their, staff of 18 people, they can fly a flag over the Capitol for them. and then not a whole lot after that. So organizations have, and I'll go off just a quick tangent, but until the 1970s, members of the U.S. House of Representatives picked the postmasters in every town in their district. Congressmen had patronage, and imagine the importance to a county chairman if every congressman had one postmaster appointment of a six-figure job in every municipality. That would change politics completely, and
we need to massively uncap the size of congressional salaries so that every House member can have 400 staff members, and half of them are filled by nephews of various.
Working in the district office today.
Yeah. Working from home, right? But anyway, I think I think the moral of the story before we move on these things is Rob Menendez and Nellie Poe are not safe, and I think they both have to raise money to insulate themselves from a primary challenge, and Nellie Poe could have both a primary and a general. And I'll tell you this, and it's I don't say it to be disrespectful or anything, but if she gets through 2025 and she's got not a great war chest, that will then attract some people to come in, and it's going to be the same thing with Menendez. If he is lethargic in his fundraising, it might say, it's what I said last week, Brian Stack giveth and Brian Stack taketh away. And if Brian Stack has a different option for next year, and we don't know who the mayor of Jersey City is going to be in 2026. We don't know a lot of these factors. So we don't know who the governor is going to be. And I think in those two districts in particular, it's just important as incumbents, a second-term incumbent in Menendez and a freshman member of the House in Poe, that they just need to watch their backs and do the kinds of things that maybe a vulnerable member would do. Let's talk about we're not going to do.
Before you do, just one name that we almost never talk about because he doesn't have to get his hands dirty usually, but this is where the top of the ticket next time is Cory Booker, and in 2026, so there's going to have to be some real coordination and conversation and partnership, and how are we going to figure this out? How are we going to get out the vote? Working with the Hudson County organization, and they're going to have to they're going to need real numbers.
I'll be fascinated to see what Cory Booker's margin ends up being, because I think that's going to be our, more so than anything in 2025, I think that will be our first real indication of whether this year's sort of coalitional changes are a lasting thing or something specific about, the Trump versus Harris inflation election 2024 environment. Like if Cory Booker puts up sort of the standard New Jersey 14-7 point Democratic victory, then we can maybe look at that and say, oh, so maybe something just odd was going on in 2024, and that's not really what's gonna last in New Jersey. If he comes in with something more like Kim, and he puts up an 8 or 9 point victory, then that's when New Jersey Democrats have to be like, oh, so we're just sort of a bit of a swing state now. Like there's no real getting around that.
Yeah, and I don't think Cory Booker's going to be under 10, but I didn't think that Kamala Harris was either. So what do I know?
What we've learned from the last 4 years is that every time we try to make a specific prediction, it will go wrong. 2021 will be fine for Democrats. No, it won't. Well, in 2020,
you just put the sign on the wall and tap it all the time. Do not predict.
And predictions are tough.
Thinking about predicting, whatever you're leaning towards, it's like, oh, it's probably the opposite.
Yeah.
We're all going to just be George Costanza. So
2021 and 2024 were supposed to be fine years for Democrats. They sucked, and then 2022 and 2023 were supposed to be sucky years for Democrats, and they were fine. So it's just like,
yeah, it is, and it, and from in line with what you're saying, Joey, if somebody had said to me on Monday, Donald Trump's going to be president, what does that mean? And look, all of us from New Jersey, what we call a presidential election is simply the opening act of a gubernatorial campaign. The governor is where it's at. That's the one that everybody cares about. I had been of the belief that if Donald Trump were the president of the United States, it would be an uphill battle for Republicans in next year's governor's race. Now, looking at these numbers, I am far less certain of that. I mean, is that a Joey? You don't seem to agree with me, so let's let Michah go first.
Well, I wasn't going to agree or disagree. What I was going to say is that it's certainly what I think is undoubtedly true is that it absolutely emboldens Bill Spadea in like a rocket ship. And when people say to him, or when organizations say we're more concerned about electability, he's going to say, oh yeah, well, how come Trump can come within 4 or 5 points in New Jersey, right? So don't talk to me about electability, right? I mean, 4 or 5 points is still 4 or 5 points, but I think it really bolsters the case for Spadea. And I think that inevitably there must be, enthusiasm today in Spadea world, like, hey, MAGA did it this year, we're going to do it again next year.
Joey, did you want to say anything? I didn't mean to.
I mean, yeah, as we were just saying, do not predict. So I will not predict.
Yeah.
But I think that sort of in the immediate afterglow of this strong Republican performance, it's sort of easy to forget how midterm elections usually work. But midterm elections have a pretty consistent gravity, and you need very specific factors to change that gravity. And obviously, we just saw in 2022 that those factors can emerge. But I mean, I think what we saw in 2022 and why Democrats did so decently were the double factor of the Dobbs abortion decision and the fact that in a lot of key races, not really in New Jersey, but in other states, Republicans nominated fairly far out candidates who just weren't really able to connect against more moderate Democrats. And I'm looking at 2025, and I don't really see anything yet that would obviously change the calculus in Republicans' favor, like the Dobbs decision. And I think that Democrats will nominate a candidate who is at minimum, relatively competent at assembling a statewide coalition. And I think that you have to start Republicans as the underdogs, which you wouldn't have if Harris was the president, because even though the math in New Jersey has shifted clearly to the right, given this election, you're going to, it almost always happens that when the party takes power, it shifts back away from that party. That's what we saw in New Jersey in 2017 and 2018. And I just think we're probably going to see it again, especially, and I know, Michah, you're going to come in, but I want to make one more point before that, which is that especially given the voters that Republicans improved with this year, that, so I was looking at one result that stuck out to me is that Kamala Harris still won the Mendhams by decent margins, even as she was, losing things that you would never think she would lose, like Garfield and Passaic and Kearney. She was still winning Mendham. And those voters that Democrats are holding on to are the ones who are still going to turn out extremely reliably in gubernatorial election years. And that's sort of this longer term trend for Democrats and Republicans, where Republicans used to have the more sort of efficient voter base because they would come out hell or high water, and Democrats were more reliant on younger voters and non-white voters and urban voters who weren't necessarily as reliable. And now that you're starting to see that shift, and now that those specific groups are the ones that Republicans are making gains with, when you have an environment like 2025 where turnout is going to be half or whatever, it's something like that, a little bit more than half of what it was this year, 2/3 of this year, the Democratic coalition, just based on this year's results, seems sturdier. But I could eat crow, right? We have no idea. And
I'll buy the efficiency argument. I mean, Trump's win nationally was very inefficient this time, right? I mean, it was, what's amazing is you're starting to see these numbers tighten in the battleground districts, in the battleground states, between Trump and Harris. She's going to wind up, she's not going to overtake him in any of them, but she's going to wind up similar to 2020 numbers, which suggests that they were just surgical as this macro environment was, moving against her, and significantly fewer votes than she had 4 years ago. She still winds up within a hair's breadth of an electoral college victory. I mean, a hair's breadth exaggerates it, but she was, the blue wall, is really tightening in those states, and so she had a very efficient loss, I guess, right? She had a
The
nearly
electoral college bias basically disappeared. Like she would have, if the
Right.
popular vote was tied ish, she would have been even odds to win.
So I'll buy that realignment is one that favors Dems, but I also think that when we talk about the rule, we also have to talk about the exception of the rule, which is 2021, right? Which is we follow Biden winning with the governor winning, albeit by a small margin. So again, if you want to look at the immediate past election for prologue, you might say, all right, the conditions are here in which we might see what David's talking about, which is another tight year, right? Is what you might say, or that we could see another tight year.
Yeah. So we're not, I don't want to go through every congressional district because we did that last week. And I don't think there were any real surprises. I mean, every incumbent that was supposed to win won. Conaway was probably a little bit closer than we thought against somebody who nobody really knew, who didn't put up much of a fight. I think if somebody were to have run in the third that was really putting up a fight, then Conaway would have had to run a different kind of campaign also.
I think there were two specific things going on there, David, that, in addition to just the presidential headwinds. I think that one, I don't think there's any question that Burlington County must have lost some voters with those lines, those hours-long lines.
Yeah.
They people stayed, but a lot more people must have gone home. Forget it, right? That's one thing that's going on. And I think another thing, and this is presidential headwinds, but in Monmouth County, Trump quadrupled his margin from 4 years ago, right? And so that was enormous. And I think you add that up to again, Conaway winning by a good margin, but not by the margin that we might have thought he might have.
Right, and even Frank Pallone took a little bit of a haircut, and Chris Smith, was. I mean, LaMonica MacIver got the most raw votes of any congressional candidate in New Jersey, but that doesn't surprise me because she has the most one-sided district of anybody in New Jersey. Number 2 is Chris Smith, and that is fueled by the Ocean and Monmouth votes. And I think Smith got a little under 250,000 votes.
I think that you might have some math wrong, David, because I'm looking at the 10th district, and it's showing MacIver at 171,000, and then Smith is at 260,000.
Okay, so Smith, so it was Smith then.
I think so.
Chris, and that's turnout.
Let's see. Yeah, 260 is going to be the bigger. Yeah, that's the biggest one of all. Yeah, 260 for him.
So a Monmouth Ocean district provided just more votes for a congressional nominee than any other place in the state, and that says something about turnout.
It also partially points towards the well done map drawing by Democrats.
It's a Republican vote.
Recognizing that if you could just sink 260,000 Republican votes into one district, and
it's a Republican. What happens if you put a proven vote performer, a proven vote sink into a vote sink district, right?
Into a district that's going to be strongly Republican and turns out at high rates. Great. Let's give them all the votes. Who cares?
You can't miss, right? You can't miss. Of course, that's what they had with, but that's also what they had with Rob Menendez, and it didn't. Those numbers didn't get there. I don't want to talk long about it, but Burlington fascinated me in terms of what went wrong there. New voting machines, connectivity issues early in the morning that they never caught up with. But the bottom line is they don't have enough voting machines there. And that led to lines. I mean, and for people who aren't aware of it, I mean, people were waiting 3 and 4 hours to vote in Burlington County. They held the polls open till 9, and if you were there by 9 o'clock, you got to vote. And the last people voted in Burlington County shortly before midnight. It was absolutely incredible. And I did. I had him on in the background, and I listened to several dozen voters who who fought their own potential disenfranchisement and appeared before a judge. And there's a couple of basic takeaways. One is not everybody in New Jersey lives in our bubble and is sophisticated in their knowledge of deadlines. And I can't tell you how many voters went before a judge and they were asked, well, when did you register to vote? And they said today or yesterday or a week ago, and didn't know that they had to be registered 3 weeks before. The other one, when you take them out of the field, that was astonishing is the number of voters who had been registered in the past, but had been removed from the voter rolls because of a glitch or a problem at the Motor Vehicle Commission. And I'll tell you, Trish Little-Floyd, the new DMV director, she is the disenfranchiser of the year because people who went in there and they were opting, changing their address, and the DMV computers were getting it wrong. And what you have is a government bureaucracy that was inadvertently and not maliciously, and that's really important. There's nothing nefarious here. It's just gross incompetence led to the disenfranchisement of voters. And I'm only hearing those that fought so hard as to go to court and fight. I'm not counting what has got to be, exponentially more voters who went in there, were told they weren't on the voter list, and they went home. And I got to give Governor Murphy credit here. I honestly thought it would be impossible to find a motor vehicle director worse than Sue Fulton, but Phil Murphy stepped up and he found somebody worse than Sue Fulton. This new motor vehicle director, Trish Little-Floyd, it was just ridiculously bad. She had people working nights and weekends during voting against her own will because she was sort of pushed into doing it. She didn't have enough. I heard a judge on a court hearing say that he's been waiting 2 hours for motor vehicles to call back to answer a question about a voter. This is something, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. You don't want people disenfranchised for something that they didn't do wrong. And I'm going to be on this one. I'm going to be on it really closely because you can't have an incompetent bureaucrat involved in voter registration who is taking away people's right to vote. And that's what Ms. Little-Floyd did here. And it is really, really disturbing.
It's we don't do policy here, right? But I spent a year.
But this isn't policy. This is
no.
This is voting rights, and that's
No. I spent a year at DOT, and we did a fixed DMV, and it was mortifying. You heard about this more recently with the what was the computer programming that they used there that nobody's used since the 1970s or 80s, right? Whatever it is. But and this is a while ago, this is 20 years ago, but you held your breath when you turned on the machines because they were so old and they were put together with duct tape and you hoped that they would turn on. And every DMV fix since then relies, people don't realize this, when any company or anybody does anything, and you put a new front on your system, you still have the crappy back old system, that they have dealt with. And so maybe in retrospect, long way of saying, maybe in retrospect, Motor Voter was not such a great idea to get a well-run system, which is our voting system, and what the State Department does, and to make it reliant upon maybe our worst example of government inefficiency that we possibly have in state government. Maybe marrying those two was not such a good idea in retrospect.
Yeah, and I mean, I may sound vehemently opposed to Trish Little-Floyd, and I think it's because I am. And one of the things that I found out that was really interesting is Sue Fulton's gone a few years. She's the acting director for a few years. She has not been nominated for this post. And the reason that she has not been nominated is she doesn't want to be nominated. She doesn't want to go through a Senate confirmation. She doesn't. I'm not saying she doesn't, like she shouldn't. I'm saying she literally has asked to remain as acting director for the duration of her stay. So she does, because she's frightened to go before senators, and now she's got really good reason to be frightened. And I think you're just going to hear more and more about it. You're sure going to hear about it from me, because if somebody is registered to vote and they're thrown off the rolls because of a DMV glitch, and nobody's taking responsibility for it, that's something that is unacceptable. And I think that everybody's going to be hearing about it and delving into it. So
and there are other problems with motor voter too. And this is not a glitch, but I saw and heard a lot of young people, a lot of new voters who just, when they get their license, they just, scribble the name on the screen. Well, they don't realize they're providing the specimen signature for what's going to be on there, and now they have to match that every time they go to vote at the polls, and it was a problem for a lot of young voters. And I don't think people realize that. I don't think people know that. Maybe again, in retrospect, maybe this wasn't the best way. I know registering everybody is a great idea, but just a lot of implementation problems.
I suppose this was, nobody should be surprised that breaking news, DMV screws up voter registration. I mean, what could have possibly gone wrong when you gave them this responsibility? And I will tell you this: you did not have widespread problems, anything of any substance, across the state. I mean, there's always going to be tiny little glitches, but this election ran really well, and as critical as I'm being of the of Ms. Little's Floyd, you got to take your hats off to Tahisha Way, because she really runs a good election. She has addressed issues. There weren't any major problems. The state did everything right in that area, and the Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State's.
Every day the data is good, it's reliable, you can take it to the bank.
Yeah.
Why should she get saddled with something that's not her doing,
Right. And this is, I mean, I won't do this to the Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, and say maybe, they should just, throw motor vehicles into her department, because she'll get really mad at me and not be happy, and that wouldn't be fair. But motor vehicles, I mean, Michah, you were there for a brief amount of time. I go back, and I'm looking at the from the 1980s. Motor vehicles has not run well in New Jersey for over 50 years. Yeah. I mean, imagine having a government agency that is broken for a half a century that nobody can fix. And so what do you out
of the State House? Ever since they took it from they put it in the hands of the bureaucrats. They took it out of the hands of the. It used to be right in the State House back in the million years ago.
Everything was.
Yeah, right, exactly. And if you were a legislator, you came and you did your business, with your, for your constituents. But I mean, ever since they took it out of there and put it in the hands of the bureaucrats, hasn't run right.
Yeah, so they're going to have to get this fixed. And look, judges, for the most part, judges did well. There were some judges that were, the judiciary was inconsistent in certain cases where you had identical situations, and one judge said let them vote, and the other judge said no, and maybe someday somebody will explain to me why on nominating petitions and ballot access, judges are instructed to interpret election laws liberally as to give voters a choice. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to voters having the choice of voting or being turned away, they suddenly become rigid and say, well, no, that's the deadline. There's, there's nothing we can do about it. Sorry, I feel really badly, but don't worry, you can vote next year. And I can't tell you how many, I'm watching these people on the screen, and I'm looking at these voters, and they're they're first of all, they're a little intimidated. They're appearing before the judge. They're not fighting. They don't know the law. They've got a deputy attorney general sitting in the room advocating against them, advocating for their disenfranchisement in an administration that has put voting rights at the very top of the list, and they're being turned away. And there is, I don't remember the exact name, Micah, you may know, but there was a study that says that if a young voter has a bad experience at the polls, they become 75% less likely to never, ever vote again for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And yet you had some
And
judges
by the way, David,
inflexible.
In some states, that's called voter suppression, right? And we point to that and we say, you're doing that on purpose so that they never come back, right? And here we're like, oh, it's a screw up. Sorry, it's just,
Yeah. Well, then that's going to be the new thing, right? Which is Latricia Little Floyd, the queen of voter suppression in New Jersey, and congratulations because I and by the way, I think discussions like this about how somebody nobody's ever heard of behaved in an election, a hugely consequential election, discussions like this are what's going to get people informed about the fact that there is a problem.
Good.
So anyway, besides the incompetence of Ms. Little's Floyd, are there any other races that stuck out for you that you think really involve?
You're shaking your head, Joey. I've got one, and it's a David favorite, right? So
I wasn't shaking my head. No, I was shaking my head just out of whiplash.
Oh, okay. All right. All right.
15 minutes of just pure.
Not what people say.
Vitriol the right word? It's certainly a negative word. And so were you looking at that Bergen County commissioner? Honestly, there aren't really any other races that I would bring up. I mean, this isn't like a legislative year where, you could just keep on going through legislative districts forever and ever. I mean, Jeff Van Drew won re-election quite easily. It's sort of clear over and over again that seat is his until he doesn't want it anymore. And possibly he won't want it anymore very soon if Trump wants to put him somewhere in his administration. I don't know necessarily the likelihood.
By the way, Joey, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if the House is as narrow as it might be, then Jeff Van Drew can't leave because it takes New Jersey 5 months to fill a congressional vacancy.
I wouldn't necessarily put it past the Trump administration, which has never particularly cared for procedural things like that, to be like, whatever. Like, Congress can figure it out. So we'll see.
Yeah, but remember, okay, all right, I get it. Except that's your majority. That's your ability to get things through Congress. So, and remember, 5 months is the shortest that it can be done, David. So and I'm not suggesting that there's going to be chicanery, but, if Democrats want to take longer, right? I mean, they set the date of the election. Right?
No doubt. I mean, 100%. The law says that the governor may issue a writ of a special election. It doesn't say he shall. So you can take it to the bank that if Jeff Van Drew were to leave Congress in early 2025 for a federal post, this seat's not getting filled until the November 25 general. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
But I don't, not a lot of other races to talk about. I think the Joe Salerno, Billy Prempa, Darius Mayfield, really, really good challengers in tough districts, made the best of what they have. I think you're gonna see all three of those names again. You're gonna certainly see Sue Altman, continue to be a force in whatever she decides to do. But I don't think this is not going to be one of our marathon 3-hour live streams. We're going to blame it on Dubicki, right? Without the talkative Ryan Dubicki, who by the way, just to be clear, he called today. He works for the Associated Press. He's still working on Nevada and Arizona. and is still crunching numbers and doing the count, which is why he's not here. And we're missed by that. But unless you have anything else, I have one last question.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Which is related to that topic that we just got done about House vacancies. So if Trump pulls ahead in District 5, does that complicate? Now, granted, the Democrats may or may not have the majority, right? I mean, you can look at it both ways. But does that complicate Gottheimer running? Does that running for governor? Does that, if that goes on the list of the districts that Trump won, is that harder for him than it is for Cheryl?
Well, I mean, look,
I don't think it will go on that list.
You don't think it is? You think it's okay?
I don't think that there's ever been, and New Jersey has had different sort of arcs to its vote counting in different years, but I don't think there's ever been a time where ballots added this late have shifted things redder.
Okay.
At this point, pretty much it's all provisionals and mail-in ballots, which tend to be blue.
Okay.
Right.
But I mean, hypothetically, yeah, that's sort of like a third order consideration, I feel like, but it's not a consideration. Like, that's not going to be what stops Josh Gottheimer from launching a campaign for governor, whether his seat is Harris +1 or Trump +1. That's not going to be the top thing on his mind. And so then,
no, not him. No,
even if sort of they don't want it, who exactly is the they who's going to
stop him? Who's going to
stop him? His allies aren't going to abandon him because they're nervous. They're slightly more nervous about his congressional seat.
Okay.
I also tend to think that in a midterm under Trump, the seat wouldn't be safe, certainly, but it would take a lot of effort from Republicans to flip it when the headwinds would probably be running against them and when Democrats would be very activated on that campaign.
Yeah.
And that goes for Cheryl's district too, although Cheryl's district, you start out with an easier starting point.
Right.
Yeah. And, if you remember a week ago, we talked about, are either of these districts in peril, and especially if one of them were to be elected governor, and none of us really thought that they would be. And I still don't think it's a worry. I think the worry would be, and it's not looking like it's the case, if Democrats won the House, 218-217, and their departure imperiled their majority. Right. And imperiled control, and I don't know that that's going to happen. So I think that might be a non-issue. So here's my closing question for the two of you, and we can all go as late as you want if there's other things you want to talk about. But we see this clear presence of Donald Trump in New Jersey, and one thing that is crystal clear to me is his popularity among Republicans. I feel really, really terrible about saying this, but the least powerful Republican in the state of New Jersey today is former Governor Chris Christie. He is regarded, probably below John Bramnick in terms of Trump Republicans. So Chris Christie, who 8 years ago was sort of running the show, right? He was in that Trump inner circle. He was calling Donald Trump every day. He was a pretty formidable force in a Trump administration. And by the way, monetized the Trump administration after his year as governor was over. But now he is sort of a pariah there. Breaks my heart, really does. Breaks my heart. I feel badly for poor Christopher. But here's my question. If Donald Trump takes sides in a Republican gubernatorial primary, if he endorses a candidate, what does that mean?
If he issues a tweet and that's it?
If he does a tweet, if he comes to campaign, if he really invests himself in one of the four Republican candidates for governor.
John Bramnick. Yeah. He loves John Bramnick.
The reason I ask is because he did that for Serrano Glasner, right? And it amounted.
But she didn't put any. But she didn't put much money behind it, and it didn't get a lot of coverage. Right. And there's a big difference between a Republican U.S. Senate primary and a primary for governor. And even even in a, even as legacy media is going away, a Trump endorsement in a gubernatorial primary, I think would be, well known.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's the thing: the number to win, the vote, the magic number to win a Republican primary is, what is it? 100, 150,000, 200,000 votes at the
About that, yeah.
outside most, right? So,
Depending on how many candidates there are, yeah.
Yeah, of course, that's what I mean. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And so can that matter to that many voters? Yeah, we have tons of examples across the country where it's moved that many Republican voters in a primary. But I mean, I think, to me, the bigger question has to be, does he get that invested for anybody? By the end of this is going to be, I'm going to put. He was hardly, he dragged himself across the finish line, right? I mean, and granted, that's a hard thing to do at, grueling campaign schedule for anybody who's running for president. But does he really want to get invested for anybody, or is he done with campaigning now? You know what I mean? Is this something where he's gonna, is he gonna do what he has to do? I'm not so sure that he's going to get invested in races going forward, unless he wants to exact revenge. And that, which, I mean, you could imagine a condition in which Gilmore says, this is something you really need to think about. This is something you really need to do. I guess you could maybe see it, but it's harder for him to see. Harder for me to see him being an active campaigner after this. I don't know.
And well, Joey, go ahead.
I mean, my answer is we just have no idea what Trump presidency #2 is going to look like. And I think if we're basing it purely on what Trump presidency #1 looked like, we might be fooling ourselves, because it's a guy whose politics are the same in some ways, but who have clearly changed in other ways. He's older, and people just react to him differently now than they did before. He's not as, I mean, as you saw in these New Jersey results, he's not as polarizing of a figure. He doesn't sort of force people into these sharply opposed camps in the way that he did kind of in 2016, 2017. And that's, I think, part of why there were a lot of people who are not necessarily hardcore MAGA people who ultimately gave him their vote in New Jersey this year, because he doesn't necessarily he doesn't necessarily have that same reputation anymore, at least not from what I've seen. And that's why so many people were able to be like, I'm voting for my Democratic congressional candidate, but I want Trump because I want prices to go down, or this or that. So all of that to say, New Jersey maybe was the first test of what this sort of new Trump can do in a primary election with his own voters, and whether he will try. As Michah said, like, we don't really know how much effort he would want to put into that. But I also do think even if it's just a tweet, that's going to be meaningful no matter what. I mean, I guess that's the baseline. It will mean something. But I don't know if we can predict yet how much.
Yeah. And I think Jack Ciattarelli has played his Trump politics differently this year than, certainly in 17 and in 20. He endorsed Donald Trump. He's been complimentary. That's a, probably a good calculated move for him in a Republican primary. We don't know what the Trump effect on a general is going to be. And look, Spadia, I mean, first of all, Trump has a fascination with New Jersey. He always has. It's, it's his second home. He had done business in Atlantic City for a lot of years. He had been a player in New Jersey politics from the sidelines. So, this is not something that is completely foreign to him. I look at, you look at Spadia, who has been a Trump guy, and he's got Bill Stepien, one of the smartest operatives in the country. And Stepien is close with the Trump world. And now Ciattarelli sort of covered his bases there. His super PAC is being run by Kellyanne Conway, who also has Donald Trump's ear. So, maybe that is at least trying for a draw. Maybe that's trying to just say, stay out of this as much as you can. And in the Senate primary that we just talked about, that endorsement for Christine Serrano-Glasner, whose husband is a longtime Trump insider who has survived a lot of iterations of Trump world. They didn't get that endorsement until late. And one of the reasons is because Jeff Van Drew was for Curtis Bashel. Jeff, they come out of that same Cape May group. They share a lot of friends in common. And I think Van Drew was able to sort of stave that off, that endorsement, until he just couldn't do it anymore. The way I heard this is that the Serrano Glasner people, until that rally in Wildwood where he announced the endorsement, they didn't know whether they were going to get it or not get it. And her husband, Michael Glasner, his job is to produce these rallies for Donald Trump. So he had his wife in the tent with Trump before he walked out there. Curtis Bashaw, wasn't in the tent. He was, up in the nosebleed section with some other Cape May people. But she was the last one he saw before he walked out on stage. And I think that played into it. But, I think he's going to continue, certainly through June of 25, to be incredibly popular among New Jersey Republicans. And I think that's one of the things we're going to look for going into the primaries, whether Trump and makes an endorsement or not.
I wouldn't be surprised if Roger Stone played was involved in somebody's campaign either in the primary, right?
Yeah, and Stone by Roger's always been in unofficial New Jersey, and I think he actually had a place in Margate for a little while, but Roger has been working in New Jersey, for 45 years, and knows a lot of people too.
Ballot Security Task Force.
But let me tell you something. Tom Kane Sr. would not be governor if not for Roger Stone. There is no doubt in my mind at all. I was around for that. I was watching that. Roger Stone helped him craft a primary message that allowed a moderate like him to appeal to conservative Republicans in a primary. And he did this ballot security task force. And when you win I think it was a little under 1,800 votes statewide, it is undoubtable that Roger Stone was a kingmaker there. So I think, I don't know. There's going to be a lot going on, but we will be talking more and more about 25, going forward. In the meantime, we are already looking forward to the next elections in New Jersey, which is, Joey, tell me if I forget any. We're going to have a special election convention to fill Nellie Poe's state Senate seat. We're going to have a special election convention to fill Herb Conaway's assembly seat, and a special election convention to replace Pam Lampett in the state assembly. So there'll be
nonpartisan municipal runoffs in at least one Trenton council district and probably a couple of other towns. I have no idea, somewhere. So we got stuff.
Fire commissioner elections are going to be here before we know it.
But Bob Menendez was indicted 13 and a half months ago. And I feel like the New Jersey politics world is oftentimes geared towards state level politics, but it's been really geared towards federal politics, which are, my stuff as the Washington guy for these 13 and a half months. So I am just looking forward to, everybody shifting their attention to the assembly and to the governor's race. And I'll cover it some, but I'm looking forward to being a little bit out of the spotlight.
Congratulations, Zach Blackburn.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's replaced Joe. Joe. He's got 80 assembly races and a gubernatorial primary and a lineless primary that will probably have a lot of machinations in terms of challenges for local and county office. So look, it never stops being fun in New Jersey. And I forgot, we have December special school elections. So this will just keep going and going, and it doesn't stop, which is probably a good metaphor to stop this live stream that I said was going to go an hour, and we've gone 2. But thank you, everybody, for not letting it go 3. And Joey says it's my fault, by the way. He says I'm the one who keeps it going.
I wonder who went on a rant about the DMV this time. Who could that be?
I'll tell you this, Joey. I've been around. I've been doing this. This is my 50. I'm finishing my 51st year in New Jersey politics. This ain't my first rant about the DMV.
Wrong name. Shouldn't we be saying the MVC?
I got to tell you, I'm gonna call it the DMV until it's fixed. They don't have any right to rebrand themselves. And I'll tell you what else I'm not going to do, Joey. I'm not accepting the fact that NJ Transit has to spell their letters, capitalize transit. They're going to be upper and lower case like community affairs and environmental protection and banking and insurance until they fix it. How's that? So we're not going to allow any more broken state government agencies to think that they can fool all of us into fixing crap because they simply change the way the capitalization or the acronym of their department.
And no hyphen.
Guarantee.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. So those of you who want to do something about it, email, Latricia Little Floyd and tell her what a crappy job she's doing. I might actually have to text Sue Fulton and say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. You were not the shittiest DMV director in New Jersey history. And congratulations. All right. And now this is all right. So this is the rant. Joey, I was prompted, right? This is now my second rant.
Okay.
I will stop.
Thank you everybody for joining us. It was a great night. Maybe we can tell David that the camera's still rolling and he'll keep talking for an hour, but the rest of us will usually go to bed. I've been Joey Fox. This is Michah Rasmussen and David Wildstein. Goodbye.
Thanks
Thanks, everybody. Good night.